as you give that attention that he craves, the key is to give that targeted attention. And then when you're not giving it, make sure it's very clear. There's nothing you could ever do that's going to make me love you any less. And this attention, I understand that you want to be near me and I'm not going anywhere. That can be massively, massively helpful. And you will see instantly a lot of those behaviors that seem to be boundary testing and testing the relationship just dissolve.
It's a brand new day. Wake up every morning and say, it's a brand new day. Take a good day, make it great, okay?
Hello and welcome to the Whole Parent Podcast. So excited for you to be here with us today, with me. I don't know who us is. I don't have any guests on this episode, but we are talking about something that is near and dear to my heart. We're talking about attention-seeking behaviors. This is one of the most common myths that I run into, which is that if your kids are practicing attention-seeking behaviors, the proper or the correct way to navigate that, which, by the way, a lot of these attention-seeking behaviors can be really annoying, right? It can feel not good to us, and we'll get into that today. But the proper way to navigate that is by ignoring them or trying to belittle them in some way or otherwise condition them out of these attention-seeking behaviors. And so if you're tuning into this episode and that's what you were taught growing up, if that's what was leveled against you growing up, you are in the right place. This is what we're going to talk about today on the Whole Parent Podcast. I think this is such an important perspective to take and a conversation to have, because this is one of the primary reasons why parents get themselves into difficult situations with their kids, because they don't understand kids' inherent need for attention. So I'm going to dive right into our 3 questions today. I'm going to try to make this a little bit of a shorter episode. Our episodes have been getting longer and longer, and I've gotten some feedback of people saying, hey, John, just get to the point. Cut the BS. We love to hear you talk. Well, I hope. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just like the information and you can tolerate it. And I will always recommend to anybody who has not done this yet, you can always listen to me on like 1.5 or even 2x speed too. If you're struggling to get through episodes, you just don't feel like you have time, you can always do that as well. But for those who are listening, on your commute, Mark, you know who you are, and you're trying to find out today about attention-seeking behaviors, let's dive into it, and I'm going to try and make it a little bit shorter than I typically do, because we've been getting a little long in the tooth. The first question comes from Robin. She says, hi, I'm Robin. I'm struggling with my 7-year-old daughter, Emma, who's constantly seeking attention. It seems like no matter what I do, she's acting out and creating drama to get noticed. I want to give her the attention that she needs, but I also want to teach her more appropriate ways to seek it. For example, if I play with her for 30 minutes, then I tell her I have to go make dinner, she can't seem to find ways to play on her own. Instead, she'll go and do something that she knows she's not allowed to do, like dump out all of the art stuff or go bother her little brother. Robin, I have a 7-year-old who has a hard time finding things to do on his own, and so I really, really empathize with your question. How can we help kids to play independently and also help them to have their emotional and attention needs met? The short answer to this, and this is something that I've said, and that maybe this is going to be just our mantra for this episode. This is something I've said in the past. This is something that I said on the episode with Eli. If you haven't listened to that episode with attachment nerd Eli Harwood yet, please go and check that out. It was a really amazing episode. My wife listened to that one. She was like, oh man, I feel like this is the best episode of the podcast ever. And she doesn't listen to every episode, so maybe that's just she only listens when she's interested, and she hears me talk about this stuff ad nauseum at home, so she's kind of like, all right, I heard this podcast just like over dinner, so I don't need to listen to it again when I'm driving to work. But in that episode with Eli, we talked about this mantra that I have, which is kids would rather have kids would rather have all of your attention some of the time rather than some of your attention all of the time. And I think that this might be the best piece of advice for you, Robin. And I don't want to say that this is like going to dismiss this, that this is going to absolutely work 100% and that your kid's never going to need your attention anymore. That's not true. Attention is a natural, and again, we'll get into that a little later in the episode, but attention is a natural and important thing for kids to get and for kids to go after. It's a normal thing for them to seek that. But in this case, you may be running into this issue of kids who just need more targeted attention for shorter periods of time, and then to not try and split your attention and give them half of it in other times. So why do I say this? Well, basically, kids can become conditioned. And this is especially true of neurodivergent kids, but it's not exclusively true. I'm not diagnosing anybody on this podcast. I've said it a million times. I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose anybody with ADHD or ASD or anything like that. But what doctors who do diagnose people with that, one of the things that they have identified is that commonly kids who have those dopamine inhibiting neurodivergencies, like ADHD, will oftentimes act out in order to get attention, to have that dopamine need fulfilled. And these kids oftentimes feel like they have just a never ending cup, right? Like you could fill them with all of your attention and time, and it's just like doesn't even scratch the surface. They just want more of you. They just want more of you. Well, for those kids, what they really need, and actually all kids, I think, what they really need is targeted attention that's for shorter periods of time rather than this half attention thing that you can do. And the problem with giving a kid half your attention, right? So like you're writing an email for work and you're just kind of like, okay, oh yeah, I see that. Okay. Or like I'm cooking dinner right now. Like you said, that's what you're struggling with, Robin. Like, cooking dinner right now. Like, yep, that's really cool. Like, oh, good job with that picture. That like half attention thing is a tease. It basically tells your kid like, hey, if you're more engaging, I'll give you all of my attention. It's much more clear, and as Brene Brown says, being clear is kind, to tell them this is not a time when I can give you my attention. And when I'm giving you my attention, I'm going to give you all of my attention. So if you have a kid who's whatever you're doing, you're playing with them, independent play, this is one of the best ways that you can play with kids who seem like they have a never ending need for your attention, is to have child directed play with you. So playing with your kid, but in a way in which they're directing the play. This can help them to become a little bit more self-reliant on their ability to kind of entertain themselves, because they're not just relying on you as the cruise director or, the person who's just constantly keeping them engaged, and you're just going from one activity to another. You're allowing them to drive it, and that kind of builds that ability. Okay, well, then I can do that on my own too. So when you're doing these targeted times of play, you want to give them all of your attention. So if you have a problem with your phone, which by the way, I do, so I'm just call it out. I have a problem with my phone. Me and my phone are in an inappropriate, toxic relationship. Sometimes my phone just seems to call out to me at very inappropriate times. I'm trying to fall asleep. My phone's just like, hey, look up that article that you were like half done reading earlier. That's how my phone is. She is a terrible, terrible influence on my life. Social media, obviously I do this as part of work. So social media, like not a good thing for me most of the time. And so because of that, I have this real problem where if my kids are trying to play with me, if they aren't holding all of my attention intentionally, right? So as a person, by the way, I am diagnosed with ADHD. So I've had ADHD for my whole life, as it's a developmental disability or disorder, depending on how you want to refer to it. I'm fine calling it a disorder or disability. For me, you don't have to own those labels if that's not something that's comfortable for you. But because of this is a developmental thing in my life. I've had this, obviously for my whole life. When I was 10, 11 years old, I had these same struggles, but without a phone. And so what happens is, if something is not actively engaging and novel to me, if something is boring to me, it feels like such a chore to do it. And kids, they play very repetitively, typically, right? Like they're investigating the world. And so expected kind of lacking novelty play is what's normal for kids, because everything feels unique and new to kids. And so expected is comfortable. And so kids will play in this very repetitive way. They'll listen to the same song over and over and over. That's a normal kid thing to do. That's a good thing for kids to do. That's how they learn in the world that they're around. They'll want to play the same card game over and over and over, or whatever. They'll want to play the same, with their little guys with you or whatever, over and over and over. And that gets really repetitive for me. And so if my phone is within my reach, it's almost impossible for me to actively engage. And so what I do when I'm going to take one of these targeted times of playing with my kids is I physically take my phone and I put it away from me. So I put it in my room, on my nightstand, or I plug it in somewhere, right? I use it as an opportunity. I look at the silver lining. Hey, my phone's always dying because I'm always posting and making these videos. So I might as well just go grab my phone right now and just go plug it in. I'm going to need to use it later for X, Y, and Z, whatever. And when I get that phone away from me, then I can actually physically engage. But it's not always my phone, right? There was a time about 6 months ago, or 3 months ago, I should say, when there were some real traumatic things for me happening at my other job. And it was like my attention was constantly focused on, like the what if, what's going to happen here? Like, how's this going to work out? How's this going to shape out? And because of that, I couldn't even be present when I didn't have my phone. And so I had to practice therapy techniques of saying, okay, here are some intrusive thoughts that are just kind of cycling. Here are some, circular thoughts that are essentially just anxiety producing. Like I'm just reminiscing and focusing on things I could be doing or what might be happening or what I've done in the past. And I'm focusing on those things. And I actually had to physically say, okay, I'm going to think about these things later after I'm done playing with my kids. And for the next 5 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. In your case, you said you had 30 minutes of playtime. I am just going to be so incredibly targeted in that attention. And that's what I do. And then at the end of that, so we're going to set expectations around that. We're going to say, okay, I have about 5 more minutes and then I got to go, whatever. So we're going to, same way that, if your kid's doing something enjoyable at the park or at a trampoline park or whatever, they're at they're doing something that they like. Anytime that's happening, you want to give your kid a countdown or some way of setting expectations. Okay, when this is over, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to set those expectations. I've got about 5 more minutes to play. After we play, then it's going to be time for me to go and make dinner. From that point on, I am not going to give them part of my attention. I'm going to really try and give them, I'm not going to ignore them, but I'm going to be really boring. Like, I'm not going to give them that target attention. And I'm just going to refer back to, hey, yeah, we had that time to play, and I know this is frustrating, and we'll have this other time to play later. But I can't, I got to focus on this right now. This is what I'm doing right now. And that delineation of here's where I'm going to give you all of my attention, and here, you know what, I'm really going to be focused on something else now. And you have to find some way to independently play. That can be really, really helpful. Then here's the trap that we fall into. We don't give them what to do instead. Because when we give them what to do instead, then they become dependent and reliant on us. And essentially that's a way of playing. Hey, I want you to go build a tower over there with Legos, and make it as tall as you can, right? It seems like a very reasonable thing. It's an independent thing for them to do. But now that they're doing it because of your instructions, you're still their playmate. And so they do it. And now you're not giving them the attention and engagement that they want, even though in their mind, they're still playing with you. Now they're like, man, like I got to do something to get their attention. How about I go pick up my little brother? How about I go, make a mess of the art supplies? These are ways to get your attention when they perceive that they have part, but not all of your attention. And again, especially kids who are neurodivergent, this is the tool and tactic that they use. Now, is it possible that you're just not giving enough targeted attention to fill that cup? Yes, but it's also possible that your kid is essentially just going to have a never-ending desire for this. It's a bottomless cup. You can fill and fill and fill and it won't matter. If that's the case, they are going to have to learn a little bit of frustration, tolerance, and patience. And at 7 years old, they are totally ready to learn frustration, tolerance, and patience, and it's good for them. You can even process with them after the fact, hey, I know how frustrating it is to want to play with someone and not be able to play with someone because I'm not available. You can do that frustration tolerance building, but it's good for them. And I'll say that this is true also for like 4-year-olds, right? Anytime after that really, really difficult 2 and 3 age where they really have no ability to have a sense of time and they really struggle with any sort of routine, after that point, you should really be working on frustration tolerance as a life skill. And so this isn't intentionally frustrating your child, right? It's not terrorizing your child just to frustrate them, but focusing on and working on that type of life skill in the context of, hey, when you're not available, and that's okay. Parents put all this tremendous pressure on themselves to be like their child's entertainment, just like the dancing monkey with the cymbals, and then you like wind up the box and like like parents think that that's what they have to be. And this is where I think a lot of the screen addiction kind of stuff comes from, is when parents get so overwhelmed that they can't be that, then they go, well, I have to give them a stand-in. I have to give them Coco Melon. I have to give them Miss Rachel. I have to give them something to keep them occupied, because otherwise they're just going to harass me the entire time. And by the way, Robin, if you need to utilize a screen for a period of time so that you can do your thing, zero shame. But if you feel like anytime you can't engage your child, you are reliant on a screen, then we have to talk about some more healthy digital hygiene. But if you're like, yeah, you know what, I got this dinner party coming up tonight, and I got like I got to do all this extra cooking, or I got to do this extra cleaning, and I'm just going to throw my kid on a screen for 15 minutes because I just can't deal right now. By all means, it's a tool. Like, use it. But if you find yourself constantly reliant on that because you just cannot have them be frustrated for any period of time, then we got to come up with some frustration tolerance. And by the way, many adults were raised in such a way, especially Gen Z, like many of the kids who were raised in Gen Z, they never built that frustration tolerance. And it's not a healthy, like, I'm not bashing Gen Z right now. I'm just saying that their parents messed up. They didn't give them the frustration tolerance that they needed. And it was, by all accounts, probably not because they were like trying to mess them up, but because they were like, yeah, my kid always wants my attention and I can't give it to them. And I don't have the support system, right? Like, this is the thing that in the 1950s, in the 1960s, even up through the 1980s, there was this level of like, okay, go play outside, go find another neighbor to bother, and, you know, go play with your cousins and next door, go to grandma's house, like whatever. And as our villages have shrunk, and as our communities have shrunk and we just don't have that anymore, then so much more is on parents. And because so much more is on parents, but yet parents have to work more than they ever have in the last 100 years in Western society, parents are working longer hours, even if it's from home, than they ever have to make the same wage or less. It becomes really, really frustrating and feels impossible. And so attention is something that you really, really have to understand. The core of this is to give your kid all of your attention at targeted spurts. That's totally 100% for them, right? In those moments, you are going to be sold out for them. And then, I'm not saying you withdraw in some harsh way or you don't, listen to them and continue to empathize with them when they're frustrated. But then you're going to say, and this is the time when I'm not going to give you my attention. And it's not that I don't love you, and it's not that I don't care about you, and you can be here in the room with me, right? I'm not pushing you away. I'm not cold shouldering you. I'm not putting you in a timeout. You can still stay here in the room, but I'm not going to be the one who in this space right now is entertaining you. That's just going to be something you're going to have to figure out on your own. And by the way, at that moment when you feel like your child's at a breaking point where they're about to snap and they're about to lose it and they're about to tear you apart because you just won't give them something to do, that's the moment right before ingenuity, creativity. I was going through this with my 7-year-old not long ago, probably a month ago. And we're going through this and he's just like, Dad, I just can't come up with anything. I need you to do it for me. I need you to tell me what to do. And he's like crying, and I'm sitting with him and I'm validating his experiences, but I'm not fixing it. And I'm saying, I know it's so hard to not know what to do, and I get it. And we just went. And it was like this moment of like, just like, maybe I should just give him his iPad and Minecraft just to calm him down. It's just like, I just can't stay with this. I'm emotionally dysregulated. I'm losing it. Like, I don't know if I can stay in this moment and hold this boundary any longer. I'm going to snap. Boom. He just got calm. And he just went in the other room and he made a zoo out of all of his stuffed animals. And he put them all in these like little places. And he had like, well, these are the mythical animals, or these are this. And this is like Matt's mythical zoo. And like, we had to like do this whole thing. And like, he closed the door. He's like, I don't want you in here. I want to figure this out for myself. And then when it was all done, half an hour later, 45 minutes later, I was done doing whatever I had to do. And I said, hey buddy, I can give you about 5 minutes. Do you want to show me? And he's like, yes. So I put my phone down. I walked into the room without it so I wouldn't be distracted, so I could be fully on his level. I kind of crouched down. I sat down, I think, on a chair so that I could be like on his level. And he's like going around the room showing me all this stuff. And he's like, yeah, it's just like, I just came up with it. All of a sudden, it just came to me. And it's like, right, because you actually have to push past that wall of somebody is going to figure out what I should be doing right now. And when you feel like you're right at that moment where you're going to break, they are going to break, but it's not a battle of wills. It's them learning the next thing to do. So I'm not saying ignore your kids, not in any way, right? Ignoring them actually accomplishes the same goal. It just does so in a way that sacrifices in the process your emotional connection and your attachment to your child. And so that's why I would say don't do it, right? It's not that it doesn't work. It works. Like, you can ignore your child and they'll also reach that breaking point and they'll push past it and they'll learn frustration tolerance, but they'll learn it at the expense of your relationship instead of learning it inside of your relationship. And I think that that's much, much better. So Robin, I hope that kind of gives you some outline and structure. And then I want to get into 2 more questions here in the next like 10 or 15 minutes here. And we will, we'll go from there. And Robin, keep listening because I think some of this other stuff is also going to help you as well. The next one comes from Eric, spelled with a C like my brother. And he says he's a father to a 5-year-old Danny who exhibits attention-seeking behavior, often interrupts conversations, acts out, exaggerates stories to get attention from me and my partner. While we want to give him the love and attention he craves, we also want to set boundaries and teach him more effective ways to communicate. Any ideas? Eric, I do have ideas for you. And they come, well, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I have ideas from you, but I'm going to do something that I've never done before. And I'm going to, after reading your question, go to my commercial break because I think I have some of the best things to say about this. And I want to hold over you that, not you specifically, Eric, but all of you listening, that this little commercial from me. All right. So here's my commercial to you, my loyal whole parent listeners. We got a problem. And that problem is our listener rate. So our download rate on the podcast has just dropped precipitously in the last month. So when we started out the podcast, we were doing really, really well. We had so many downloads, so many people actively engaging. And then all of a sudden it just fell off a cliff. And I think that it's because a lot of people reviewed and rated right away. They did what I was saying. And then a lot of people stopped doing that. There was just the people who were going to do it did it. And then the people who were never going to do it have not done it. If you're a person who was like, I was never going to do it, you could help me so much. It's such low hanging fruit right now to rate and review. But also, I think the other thing that we're running into is that we're not getting a lot of this stuff shared more broadly on social networks. So I can post videos of myself doing this podcast, and yeah, some people listen to them, and I do an email funnel and things like that. If you're listening to this because you got an email about it, hey, congrats, you're joining the Whole Parent Podcast group, the group of people who is the Whole Parent Podcast Nation. Is that what we call it here? And yeah, so that might be a way that you can do it, but also just the best way to do it is just to share it on your social media. So if you're a person who's like, yeah, you know what, I listen to a ton of parenting podcasts, or maybe I only listen to this one. I am just a local, normal guy doing this. I just do this literally in my home office. It's one of the bedrooms in my house. My kids share a bedroom so that I can have this space for homeschool for my kid. That's all that stuff behind me. And I record a podcast on this computer. And so, I'm just a normal guy doing this. And the best way that you can help me is I don't have anybody promoting my stuff. I don't have some big brand who's putting out my stuff for me. I don't pay anybody. I don't pay for ads, nothing like that. Literally, I don't get paid to promote, HelloFresh or something like that. A lot of people are BetterHelp. I feel like everybody gets promoted by BetterHelp. I don't have any of that stuff. I just have you. You are my messenger. You're my brand evangelist. You're the one who's going to help so many parents connect with the Whole Parent Podcast Nation. We're going with it. And connect deeply and learn about parenting, learn about evidence-based parenting, have conversations about attention-seeking behaviors, actually get practical advice, not just navel-gazing about the whims of child rearing, but actual practical advice. Hey, how can I help? And so if this is helpful to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with other people. Share it, through a text message. Shoot it to somebody who's in a workout group with you. Shoot it to somebody who goes to, some sort of social environment, whether that's a faith community or whatever. Share it with somebody over there. Find a group of people, just your friends. Share it with your friends. Share it with your coworkers. Find somebody in your life who would benefit from this. Find just one person. And if every single person who listens to this podcast sends it to one other person, not just this episode, but any of the episodes, any episode that you feel like is good for somebody in your life, if every person did that, the viewership would double. And then it would be able to pick up all of this traction and stuff like that. And so this is by far the most difficult thing that I do on Whole Parent, compared to the videos that I put out or the membership. This is the most challenging and the most time intensive. And so I can't keep doing it if the engagement keeps dropping. And so I just want to tell you, you can save it. You can put this information out. You can go out and spread this to the world. And when you do that, not only does it help the world, it also helps me, right? It also helps me to know that this is the right type of thing to keep doing and keep producing. And so if you're listening and you're like, oh man, I haven't done that yet. I haven't rated or reviewed it. I haven't sent it to somebody. Just do it. Just do it. It'll take you 30 seconds. Think about how long it takes me to record these. And I don't get anything for this. I don't get paid for this, nothing. I just put these out. In fact, I pay to do this. I pay a podcast hosting service so that I can put these out and make them high quality for you. But I don't get nothing. I get nothing back except for knowing that I am helping people engage and change their parenting. And so if you can help me on that journey, I would be eternally grateful. So please do that. And let's get back to the question from Eric. All right, Eric. So here are my tips, right? The first one is to understand and acknowledge where attention-seeking behavior comes from. So I'm going to dive here a little bit into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I have a piece about this in my upcoming book. But one of the things that we fundamentally misunderstand is that a need for connection in kids and attention is a safety need. And this is kind of a radical perspective, okay? I don't have a lot of data to back this up. So I always talk about trying to be evidence-based as much as I can. But I've brought this to several psychologists and psychiatrists and other people in the attachment world. And I've said, hey, here's my theory about kids and the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Kids are a little different than adults because their need for social connection is not a kind of social need as it is in adults. It's actually a safety need. And the response back that I've gotten is, wow, John, that's actually a really interesting point, and that very well could be the case. And so if you're unfamiliar with the pyramid or the hierarchy of needs, you start off with things like base needs for all people: food, shelter, water, safety type needs, right? And then you move up the ranks, and I should have had it in front of me. Actually, I'm gonna go get it right now. All right, I pulled up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs because in the moment when I'm recording these podcasts, I can never remember exactly what it is. Okay, so starts off with what we call the physiological needs, which are these are the needs that are like food, water, warmth, and rest, right? So these are the parts of you when we talk about kids having their basic needs met, otherwise they'll act out. Like food, water, if your kid's hungry, like they're going to act out, right? Like that's just a part of life. By the way, if you're hungry, you're going to act out. These are everyone's kind of fundamental needs. Well, the next need on the Maslow hierarchy of needs, the second tier, so the second most basic need that all humans have is safety. And this is just, am I safe, right? And so this is why PTSD is a thing in people, or according to Abraham Maslow, this is why PTSD would be a thing, which is PTSD is not knowing if you're safe in your own environment. And so because of that reality that we're not always safe, right? And this is where when you're in a violent domestic violence situation, when you are maybe in an area of the world that's experiencing either ecological crises like, natural disasters or, war-torn parts of the world, your safety and security needs are not being met. When somebody breaks into your home, all of a sudden people have, tremendous peace of mind loss because their security has been violated in some way. And so this is a really, really, important thing. Next up is belonging and intimacy, friendships, social groups, etc. And then you get into what we call like the higher needs, and the higher needs are esteem, respect. Am I respected? Am I cared for? Not just like am I cared for socially in a group, but like do people think of me as a positive person in society? And then finally, at the very, very top of the tier is the one that people tend to focus on, which is self-actualization. This is like, do I feel fulfilled? Do I feel like do I have good hobbies and stuff like that? And what we know from science, right, from studies, longitudinal studies, is that belonging and love needs for adults are massively important. They're massively important. They actually are a predictor of lifelong physical, mental, and emotional health. People die much, much younger. It's actually more detrimental to your health. Don't hear me say that you should go out and like drink a ton and smoke, but it's actually better for your health to drink and smoke in excess than it is to be excessively lonely, right? This is like kind of radical things that we've learned about human psychology. Loneliness is a killer of people. And so understanding this, we highly prioritize these things, but we have never put them in the same category as safety. We would say like safety though, like that's a real traumatic, if you're lacking safety, you're going to have all sorts of problems. It's not like loneliness where over a long period of time, it's going to affect you. No, in immediate aftermath of feeling unsafe, you can have long-term psychological harm. In fact, it can change the wiring of your brain. This is why, by the way, people who feel chronically unsafe, they grow up in chronically unsafe homes, chronically unsafe communities, their physical brain is different. Their amygdala is larger. The part of their brain that senses fear is larger and more active. They're more prone to anxiety and depression, other things like that, because of their physical brain, because their safety needs are violated. Well, my hypothesis is that basically in children, the belonging and love needs is typically where we put the parent-child relationship. It should actually be more like a safety need, because kids are so incredibly reliant on their primary caregivers for safety and security, right? If you leave your child out in the cold and, abandon your child in the wilderness, you abandon an adult in the wilderness, they'll probably be able to survive some days, like maybe even weeks, maybe even months. Have you ever seen that movie Castaway? I mean, it's a movie, but like you get the point, right? Like you can have a movie that doesn't feel so phenomenal where a person lives for years in isolation. Of course, the person's not going to be healthy emotionally, physically, etc., but they could survive. Children cannot, right? This is just the case. In the book Lord of the Flies kind of highlights the social breakdown of children who are abandoned on an island, but in reality, so many more kids would just die of starvation and just not having their basic needs met. They're just not fundamentally able to cope, even at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And obviously the kids in Lord of the Flies are a little bit older than that. But these safety needs, which again are they're social needs, but they're also safety needs. This is where the attention-seeking behavior comes from, because these kids fundamentally are really scared that, like, if my primary caregiver abandons me, that I'm done, I'm gone, I'm like whatever, I'm just like toast. And so because of this, we have to understand that these needs are inherently safety needs. And so as safety needs, we have to understand that the attention-seeking behaviors are coming from a feeling of, am I going to be abandoned? Right? So when my caregiver is focusing their attention elsewhere, is this a sign that they're no longer connected to me? And so the best way to kind of cope and deal with this is to just continually affirm your child, like, hey, I'm not going anywhere. Hey, there's nothing you could ever do to make me love you any less. And by the way, these attention-seeking behaviors where they act out, and this goes for you too, Robin, where they act out and they do things that are like problematic to see how you'll respond. Yeah, they're testing the boundaries of your relationship. They're not just testing the boundaries of your patience. They're testing the boundaries of, are you going to like ignore me and abandon me? Like if I'm not sure when my attention's coming, like, is that a sign that you're slowly pulling back from me? And by the way, they're in a developmental phase where they're slowly pulling back from you. And so as they slowly pull back from you, they're afraid that you are then going to slowly pull back from them. And so just constantly reaffirming and giving that attention that they crave in the same way that I told you to do that with Robin, but also surrounding that, wrapping that in this idea that, hey, there's nothing that you can ever do that's going to make me love you any less. That is going to be massively, massively, massively important for you in that process. When you're able to do that, when you're able to give that attention, but also kind of speak to that need and validate that you're not going anywhere, that their need for attention to be connected to you is a safety need. When you say, hey, I know it's scary when I'm not with you. I know that it's scary when I have to go to work. I know that it's scary when I'm not paying attention to you, or I know that it's not a fun feeling. When you validate those things, you actually, and this is why ignoring is not a good thing, because ultimately if you ignore them, they'll just get more and more reckless with their behavior until you finally pay attention. And by the way, this is like that old trope in TV and movies where like the person who has a father figure who's absent, like just, behaves increasingly with risky behaviors, right? This is why that is the case. That's why that trope kind of like speaks to an innate sense of us and to our human sensibilities, is because we go, yeah, that feels realistic. If you had an absent parent, a parent who just seemingly did not care about you and did not give you their attention, you would go seeking that attention from someone else to get that safety need met. And so understanding that and trying to work within that system and say, no, I'm going to be here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to abandon you. No matter what happens, I'm never going to abandon you. These are the things that you can say. And this, by the way, is why Fred Rogers, when there was very famously, before he started Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, there was a falling out between him and a co-host of another show that was very similar to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the first time he ever used Daniel Tiger and his puppets. And he had a co-host on that show, a woman, and she was really interested in media of all kinds, including comedy. And so she did some comedy work where some of the jokes were around like abandoning your kids. and like just totally ignoring your kids. And she thought of this as like, this is no big deal. This is targeted at adults. It's not targeted at kids. Like they're not even going to see it. And Fred went off the rails because he said, this is the greatest fear of all children, is that they're going to be abandoned by their primary caregiver. And it basically eroded their relationship and ended that relationship over time because he could not get over the fact that she did not understand how toxic it was to tell children that they could potentially be abandoned. And so if you, Eric, as you give that attention that he craves, the key is to give that targeted attention. And then when you're not giving it, make sure it's very clear. It's not like there's nothing you could ever do that's going to make me love you any less. And this attention, I understand that you want to be near me and I'm not going anywhere. That can be massively, massively helpful. And you will see instantly a lot of those behaviors that seem to be boundary testing and testing the relationship just dissolve. So let's get on to our last question. Question number 3 comes from Bridget, and Bridget has a 2-year-old, and she says, I'm seeking advice on how to manage my 2-year-old son's behavior. He often resorts to whining, tantrums, and disruptive behavior to get my attention, especially when I'm busy on the phone or with other tasks. When he needs my help, I try and respond as quickly as I can, but sometimes it takes a second and he immediately launches into full-on rage mode. I'm starting to feel like I am a slave to his outbursts. Any advice would be much appreciated. Bridget, this is another really common and challenging thing, and it comes again from unmet needs. But in this case, I actually don't think that the unmet need is necessarily attention. As we've been talking about, right, with targeted, specialized attention or specific attention, sometimes also kids get our attention in order for us to meet other needs. And one of the most common things is that a kid doesn't realize their needs when they're actively engaged in something, but then all of a sudden, as soon as you're on the phone or as soon as you're trying to talk to a friend or whatever, they'll all of a sudden realize, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm this and that. And then all of a sudden they seem like they just need you all, in that moment. And if they don't have you in that moment, it's going to be impossible. And this is kind of that frustration tolerance thing coming to bear, where at a 2 years old, it's really hard to navigate frustration tolerance. And so the short answer to this is let your kid grow up, which I know is not an answer that most people like to hear because they want to figure out a short-term solution right now. How can I fix this right now? But the answer really is you have to let your kid grow to the extent where they can start to manage that. And so really simple thing to do, try and make sure your children's basic needs. I like to use the acronym HALT. It's something that's been available and widely spread out around parenting circles. Hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. So if your kids are one of those things, it's going to be hard for them if those basic needs are not being met, those lower Maslow needs are not being met, they're going to look to you to help them with those things. And so one of the things you can do is, hey, if you're going to be out and on the phone or something like that, just have a snack ready. I know that sounds, overly simplistic, but just have a snack ready. Have some stuff around your house. Hey, if I got to pick up the phone, if I have to go respond to something urgently, this is especially true if you have multiple kids. We talked about sibling problems, I think on the last episode or maybe the episode before that. And our sibling problems are new baby. That was one of our earlier episodes. This happens a lot. Your attention gets pulled to that other child, the child who was actively engaged with you all of a sudden isn't. And they seemingly need your help with something immediately because they all of a sudden are aware of a need that they had as soon as there's space for them to be aware of it. A really clear example of this, by the way, is kids when they're on devices. So this, again, I've kind of been talking a lot about neurodivergence, but a lot of neurodivergent kids, this is a really extreme issue. But any kid, they get so engrossed in their environment of whether it's playing a game or watching a show or watching YouTube or whatever, they get so engrossed that they don't realize that they're starving. They get so engrossed they don't realize that they're tired or that they need to move or that they need to use the bathroom. And then they wind up, having an accident or when you take it off, take time for the screen to go away, they have a complete meltdown because they aren't having their basic needs met. So just having a little snack beside you and being aware of that, kind of keeping track of your kids' habits in those ways, knowing that, hey, as soon as I get on the phone, if they have a basic need that's not been met, they're going to let me hear it. So understanding that and trying to embrace that to try and build in the systems around you for that to be the case, where you have those basic needs being met. That can be super helpful. And it's just also another way to distract them away from the fact that you're not consciously paying attention to you. Again, they're just lobbying for your attention in those moments because they know that you are the one who can fix the problem that they have. And so, letting them grow up, which I know is terrible advice. It's like, why would you even send in this question thinking that that's how I'm going to respond? But really, that is how I'm going to respond. And another piece of this too is everything that I said to Robin and Eric also applies here, which is that, hey, if you're not giving that targeted attention, then maybe the basic need that's not being met is that they are truly just lonely, that they just want you around. And when you're on the phone, that comes to bear. They notice it. But if you feel like you're giving your kid, targeted attention and things like that, then the question is, okay, what's the next need, right? Are they hungry? It might just be that. I have a huge section in my book where I realize that, I have this analogy that I use for my own parenting experience where I'm talking about, I didn't know what was wrong with my middle child. It just seemed like every single day he was having a meltdown. I couldn't figure it out. Is this developmental? Like, what's going on? And it turned out that he was just super, super hungry. And he just was so engaged with what we were doing in the mornings, he wasn't realizing it. And then when it was time to leave, it slowed down enough to realize I'm super hungry. And then he had a huge, complete meltdown. So that's the kind of embrace the suck. This is not a forever thing. You can set timers and things like that. They're not always helpful for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. Sometimes they can be helpful to have a visual aid of how much time they have to wait until you're off the phone. It can also be helpful for you as a parent to go, hey, I'm gonna cut this conversation off. I can't ever seem to get off the phone when I'm, you guys can tell I like to talk. Otherwise, why would I do a podcast? But it's hard for me to get off the phone. And so those timers can be helpful to me as well. So embrace this period. It is a difficult period of development related to attention, but don't look at this as a negative thing. That's all I'll say is, as you embrace the suck of having a 2-year-old, 3-year-old who just needs your constant attention in some ways, or seems to demand your constant attention, and you feel like I'm just trapped by this person, it's so much more tolerable when you appreciate that this is a stage of development and this won't always be this way. This is kind of what we talked about in the newborn sleep episode, or in the sleep episode, I should say, where we talked about newborn sleep with Dr. Consagra. And he was like, one of the most helpful things to parents about newborn sleep is not actually anything related to the newborn. It's related to the expectations of the caregiver, that it's not a forever thing, that it's a couple months. And that's my kind of call to you. This is a thing that right now, and it is going to be challenging, and it does feel like your 2-year-old constantly wants your attention, and you're not alone. I am with you. I have a 2-year-old. He does that too, right? He acts that way. It tends to be older kids act that way even more than younger siblings, because younger siblings are a little bit more willing to wait for things because they've had to wait for things. But all 2-year-olds do this to an extent. So you're not doing anything wrong. You're not a bad parent. This is just a stage. It's not forever, but they do need that attention. They need your help. And so finding ways to just kind of build in systems so that you can give them the quick wins and you can meet those needs. Remember, all behavior is just communication. So if your kid is doing something problematic, they're trying to communicate something to you. They're trying to communicate that they have a need that's going unmet. This is true for all of our questions today. When kids act kind of negatively, we'll say, or they do things that they know are going to get our attention, even if it's not positive attention, it's because they need it. They need our attention in those moments. And so this goes for all of the questions today. But remember that attention is not some sort of negative character trait. Attention-seeking behavior is not a negative character trait of your kids. It is a developmental, normal stage for them. And because being attention-seeking is a normal stage, we have to embrace and build scaffolding and build frustration tolerance and do targeted attention and all these other things that can help support our children through that stage. But it is just a stage, and it will go away. And there will be a day, someday in the future, to each and every one of you where you cannot imagine why your 14-year-old does not want your attention anymore. Your 16-year-old seemingly doesn't want your attention. They want nothing to do with you. And so, I don't mean to try and scare anyone, but when that day comes, You want to have given your child as much attention, targeted, good attention, not half attention, not I'm on my phone, but I'm giving you attention, not I'm scrolling, but I'm giving you attention, not I'm responding to this email, but I'm giving you attention. The full attention. When your child gets to an age where you're not going to have to give them that anymore, you're not going to regret having given it to them when they're younger. Just remember that, embrace that, and be a whole parent in that way. Give them everything that you can, because you only have them for a short period of time when they're this little. Guys, that's our episode today, all about attention-seeking behaviors, how to manage them, how we can navigate attention-seeking in kids, why kids attention-seek, all of that stuff. If this episode has been helpful to you, what I said at the mid-roll still applies right now. Please share it with somebody in your life. That's the only way that this gets spread. A lot of people think, John, you have 1 million followers across social media. You must have 100,000 people at least downloading these episodes of the podcast. It's not true. There are very, very few people as a percentage of my following who download the podcast. And that is not any sort of indictment against the podcast. That's just the nature of moving people from one platform to another. It takes time. It doesn't happen immediately. And so you can be so helpful by sharing this with people in your life. Not because I am looking for numbers, or I'm looking for likes or clicks or this or that, or I'm trying to make, no matter how many people listen, I don't get paid. So it's not like there's any incentive to me. I truly want the most people to benefit from this. And so many of you have written reviews, have emailed me, podcast. If you have a question, I should say that podcast at wholeparentacademy.com is the place to submit your questions for the podcast that I can answer here on the podcast. But, as people have written me emails and replies and said, this is so beneficial. I love this podcast. I'm so engaged. I can't wait for it to come out every Tuesday and Thursday. That's great. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your friends. Share it with people in your life. There's no greater compliment than taking my stuff, putting it up on your social feed, shooting it in a text to somebody who is a parent in your life. That is the best, most effective way that you can spread this message, person to person. We love personal recommendations. So, yeah, do it. And I'll see you next time on the Whole Parent Podcast.